Welcome. I'm Dawn Spiegelberg, a heart coherence coach, and this is the Live by Heart Today show. This is a show designed to help you navigate change, uncertainty, and the new world we found ourselves in. In our last show, I talked about the truth of injury, how it's an imbalance of not just the body, but the mind and the spirit too. Just an aside, when you look at me in these videos, you may notice things like my head tends to be crooked like this. That's another part of this spinal injury that I have. You might notice, my jaw isn't quite straight, or I hold my head in a certain way, or those are all results of the imbalance that I work toward rebalancing in my physical body. And this affects the mind, and it affects the spirit. One important thing to understand is, if I was concerned about you constantly seeing all my imbalances, I would never record a show, right? If I was letting those things be an impediment to appearing on this show and making recordings, I might never deliver the message of truth and the message of trust to you. And that would be out of alignment spiritually. So today, I'd like to discuss in more depth this concept of being in balance spiritually, because I think it's really, really important. And most people, Christians included, and maybe even Christians more so, don't know what it means to be in God's will or to be in spiritual balance. Because I've been asking the Christian community, and very few people are able to tell me how to know God's will. And they talk about it. They'll say, well, pray. Okay, you can pray, but how does that tell you what God's will is? At one point, I asked a small group of women who I was studying the Bible with, and we had been studying Christ and how he was praying before his arrest and death. And that appears in the book of Matthew, chapter 26. So his prayer was, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. The next part of the prayer is equally important. And what does he say? Not my will, but thy will be done. How did Christ know that it was God's will that he would die? Just like, how does a missionary know it's God's will to go to some other country? How does a preacher know that he's supposed to read the Bible and preach? How do I know I'm supposed to talk on this show and discuss Live by Heart? Is it God's will? Is it God's will that someone go to work and be a nurse? Is it God's will that someone pump gas or work at a grocery store? Yes, it is. And let me share with you an idea that came from a man named Thurman Fleet from the last century. He introduced the differences between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. I believe those represent the mind and the heart. If you recall, in other shows, we've talked about how the mind, this is the conscious mind, it chooses, and that's its job. Chocolate, vanilla, good, bad. And our mind is very easily changed. The subconscious mind, though, this would be the mind of our heart. That's the program that's running, a lot like a computer has software and runs the software program. It's not so easy to change that, and it forms our core beliefs. So why is this significant? Because if you have a core belief, if you're running a program that says you're not good enough, that becomes the foundation for everything your conscious mind thinks about. For example, I'm not good enough, therefore I don't deserve a new car or even a better car than the junker that I drive now. And understand, this is true of everyone. And it's kind of true of me too. Actually, that example of not driving a better car comes from a not deserving program that was encoded to me from experience when I was growing up. Okay, so where does the will of God come in, you may wonder? In order to know God and his will, you can't be having this constant head chatter that dictates all of who you are and the decisions that you make. I've mentioned in prior shows that our brain is constantly assigning good and bad. That's the head chatter. The solution comes straight from the Bible, which, by the way, precedes the self-help culture we've been raised in and is a thread that can be found in the self-help culture. The answer: renew your mind. Yes, as simple as it sounds, that's a part of the solution. We are to renew our mind of all the crazy that got in there from the world. That's the external things, stimulus that enters our eyes, our ears, our nose, our skin tactily. So, how do you renew your mind? You change what you put into it. You practice stillness. This comes straight from the Bible too. Even if you don't believe in the Bible, or even if you don't believe in God, the answer is be still. Change the chatter, add something else, and know. Tap into the knowingness that we all have from our heart. When you're still, when you still your mind, then you can hear that softer urging from your heart. That's God's will, being connected to the Great Spirit, being connected to the eternal. You know what? People can't still their mind. They find it difficult. The thoughts keep coming and coming and coming, and we know they're really loud. So that's the initial practice of the Live by Heart method. And believe me when I say it takes something. It takes practice. It takes diligence. It takes repetition. Just like we build muscles through repetition, through practice, so that we can become stronger and then we can use them when we need them. So it is with our mind. And while you're practicing to still your thinking, another great thing to do is to put better things in there. Stop watching the crazy TV programs, the movies, the shows. Stop watching the news. That won't allow you to be still. In fact, it's designed to do the exact opposite. It's manipulating you because it's bringing up your fear mechanism. Listen, if you're not still and you're listening and acting on every little thing your ego brain comes up with, then, to quote a preacher I know in LA, the devil is your daddy. God is not your father. That's my part. God is not your father. When the devil's your daddy, you live in stress, you live in overwhelm, chaos, fear, resentment, anger, envy, jealousy, name it. All those things that everybody knows is not godly, right? If you ask yourself, okay, is resentment a godly characteristic? You know right off the bat, no, God is holy. Holy means to be set apart. But when you're still, when you're centered, you're kind, compassionate, you're caring. You're not taken up into the drama of what's happening in the world around you, but you're centered, you're in peace. And there's space to breathe. In tomorrow's show, I'm going to talk more about how being centered and in peace can help you to live by heart and to know God's will. And I'll use an example from nature to demonstrate. I look forward to seeing you then. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining me for this little minisode of heart. It would mean so much to me if you just click like on this video, and if this information was beneficial to you, please share it with someone else who you know would benefit from living by heart and from understanding what God's will is. If you turn on notifications, you won't miss any of these little 5-minute minisodes that happen every Monday through Friday at 4:44 Pacific time. And it is my pleasure to share with you. Live in God's will when you live by heart today.
And that concludes this portion of Live by Heart Today. Thank you for joining us. Have a happy always. View more episodes on our website.
We'll talk a little bit about science, a little bit about how our body works, a little bit about intuition, and we'll talk a lot about transformation.